All right, and now moving on to our first panel for the day, titled, How will Web3 enable the true ownership of data? I would like to warmly introduce our moderator for this panel, Bianca Buzea, Developer Relations Engineer at Bouteloup Labs. Bianca, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. How is everyone doing? Yay, nay? Before starting this panel, I would like to invite you to think about something. In 2020 alone, the market data was estimated to be 450 billion USD dollars. However, most of that value stays in companies who are studying our browsing history. However, Web3 has the potential to change that. Today, with some amazing panelists, we'll discuss how Web3 can change data ownership and data as a whole. Let me introduce you LDF, Head of Partnerships at Disco XYZ, and also Joe Dao Maxi. We also have Amelia Guertin, COO of Bundlr. And Garry Krugljakow from OVX Protocol. We also have a remote guest who unfortunately couldn't join us today physically, but we have him joining via internet. So please welcome Julien Bouteloup, founder of State Capital, Blackpool, and Rec News.
Hello.
Okay.
Sorry for not being physically on the spot.
Okay, I think we're all set. I would like to start this conversation by asking you which part of data ownership is the most important to you. Who wants to start?
Ladies first.
So to me, I think the most important part of data ownership, or at least the conversations that are getting started right now, are the opportunity for the general public to reconsider kind of the role of data in our everyday life, and not only what ownership means, but also what responsibility kind of goes with those changes in what data means, how it's being used, and what possibilities we have in the future to change that. Because I think the word data to the everyday person not in this room is one of fear. And so the opportunity to change that is very exciting for me.
Yeah, I would just add to that. So when we think about the word ownership, usually we associate it with property rights. And the reality is that ownership, property rights, is not going to accomplish what we're looking to get out of ownership, which is access, control, protection, and privacy. So what is really important to me when we're thinking about data ownership is making sure that we're embedding rules that reflect that in our networks, and then also establishing privacy rights within our networks as well. The other thing that's really important is defining who should own which data, right? So there's personal data, and then there's non-personal data that usually companies or projects, or it might be a public good as well. So it's really important for us as a community to really define what that means. And the reason why this is important is because when we think about like the psychological well-being for humans, like it is so important for us to make sure that people feel safe within the space. You know, there's 81% of Americans who feel like they don't have control over their data right now, and 93% of Americans would really like to have control over their data. So if we can get to a place where we have access, control, protection, and privacy embedded in everything that we do in Web3, that will be really special, and I think is where we should get to.
Yeah, I can second that. I think self-sovereignship is something that is becoming more of a key topic these days in tech. And what gets me excited is probably what kind of products can be built around more sovereignty around your data, more free decision making, what data is being used and how. So yeah, very excited about the products that will be built around that, because I think we're just starting right now. We haven't seen probably most of the possibilities that come with that.
Now that we've seen why data ownership is important, I have a question to the audience. Who from you think that you own your data in Web3 as it is right now? Please raise your hand. No one? So everyone else doesn't think that they own their data in Web3 as it is right now? Own data or own control? Data. Okay, now the same question to the panelists. Yes, no?
No.
No, not based off of what we just said.
Probably not, but at least it's more traceable, I guess, than in the Web2 world.
Probably now you guess what I'm gonna ask next. What is missing to own your data?
More accountability by the middlemen that use and process your data, I guess. That would be a good start.
I also think we need a lot more types of data, even just considering what we mean by Web3. Having access to a list of transactions that we have completed does not make up a meaningful amount of information about ourselves to determine owning data about ourselves.
Garry, you mentioned accountability. I'm curious, this is a question for each of you. What steps is taking each of the protocol you represent to make data ownership more decentralized?
I can go first. So today, Bundlr is totally open, but we have the option for encryption for single tenants and then multi-signature encryption for M of N. You can also use protocols like LIT protocol for programmatic ownership. And then on the decentralization front, we're highly dependent on a very decentralized network and therefore inherit a lot of their security. But we're also working towards our own decentralization. So we launched our first testnet on July 13th. We're doing testnet 2, which is going to be our incentivized testnet, which will be the major step getting into mainnet, which is to be fully decentralized.
Awesome. Yeah, we're a money market lending protocol on Polygon, and what makes me very excited about Web3 data ownership is that it will become way more easy to get a loan for someone that might not have the credit history as we define it in the Web2 or traditional financial world. And there are many use cases for that, less discrimination, but also more complexity on how to score someone in a fair and less complex way, because currently it's a nightmare. There are just too many data points. But yeah, that's something I can share a bit more on, but it gets me very excited.
And Disco is a simple web application that right now allows an individual to come use their existing public and private key pairs, starting with Ethereum, but eventually will be able to be cross-chain and using kind of the W3C standards for decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials. We believe that encrypting data against people's private keys and allowing them to choose where they store that information in decentralized storage, if they want to print out a QR code of it and be able to independently verify that data, that's completely up to the user. And so providing a simple interface for people to create these pieces of data about themselves and then move it around as they see fit is the future that we see and are working towards.
Thank you. Can we also connect Julien?
You go.
Probably not.
Haven't seen him in a minute.
Not, okay. We're moving to the next one. So we're striving towards data decentralization. However, there are specific use cases when we need data to be aggregated. And I'm going to give you an example, for example, to train AI or recommendations engines. Do you think these use cases are worth to aggregate the data, to centralize it, or not?
I would argue that AI models today, I mean, AI in analytics is like fairly new when we look at the history of just data in general. And to Garry's point, there's been a ton of instances where the outcomes of those models have not been favorable for underrepresented individuals, and then also based on gender, depending on the data that is input into those models and the people who are creating them. So while I do think that it's great that we have insights that are being surfaced, I don't think that they are really where they need to be in order to serve the greater population.
I agree. I also think, AI as a tool, I think is a foregone conclusion that we're going to have to deal with and build protections into. And I think that's actually why personally owned and available data to be able to recreate these models in a way that better serves individual users is something that's going to continue to become so important. Because to your point, I might complain about my Instagram or my TikTok algorithm, but I have no control over inputting, providing more data, or giving someone else the opportunity to kind of rectify the outcomes of these models as they exist today.
Yeah. Yeah, I think data aggregation, AI, ML, all great buzzwords, but like in the real world, I think for now at least, the one use case I've seen also in my previous companies was maybe coming back to finance or finance applications is probably like fraud protection or prevention, where there might be already some good work done in that regard. But yeah, overall, I think it's very early days.
Now, my next question is, do you think we can still have these technologies while at the same time preserving the spirit of data ownership and decentralization? Somehow, I don't know, maybe create some new business models or...
I'm really excited about the potential of decentralized AI. I think it's a new topic that's come to light, but it actually does solve a lot of problems that we had just described with centralized AI. So by like creating transparency on how these models are created, having multiple people contribute to the models that are being created, you avoid the common mode error, which is like what we think about in decentralization a lot. And then also by providing incentives on getting a number of different people to contribute to these models is incredibly powerful. And then to your point too, in like being able to allow users to input different types of data. You know, you think about the mortgage process, and it's a pain in the ass, and a lot of people don't have the documents that are required for the mortgage process because they don't fit the conventional job that would provide them with those documents. So, yeah, I think there's a huge potential for us to sort of tweak the way that things are being done with decentralized AI.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I also think to that point, I think there's a large opportunity with incentive alignment to come up with a number of different incentives that we can actually prove demand for with the people that aren't going to be building these tools but want access to them. And so to the extent that we can, give them the ability to vocalize the incentives that they want to see met instead of using a couple of different platforms that have determined a specific business model that they've kind of locked themselves into, the better off we will be.
Yep, nothing to add. I agree.
LDF, you mentioned about incentives. Can you imagine new business models where users basically are selling with their consent, their data?
I can, but it's not one of the most exciting things to me. Just from a general value perspective, to me, the most my data is most valuable to me because of the things that it can afford me to be able to do, whether it's personalization, whether it's experiences, whether it's the types of people that I'm interacting with. And instead of looking at selling data as kind of like, I guess it would almost be like me getting discounts on like stuff that I'm already buying because instead of having like a third party essentially brokering a value on my behalf, I think there are more interesting, almost like barter relationships that can exist versus explicitly selling data, which kind of affords privacy to those who don't need the financial incentive and are instead looking for other types of incentives.
Thank you. What are the other panelists thinking?
I think it's really hard to, I mean, you can monetize your own data as an individual, but I think there's a bigger opportunity to do like a collective network where we have a marketplace where a group of us might decide that we want to sell our data as a collective, which is actually more valuable to a third party than us trying to go individually, and it's also not very scalable long term. I don't see like Amazon being overly excited to go to like every single one of us to ask for data. So there's a huge opportunity for like collective networks and creating like data marketplaces.
Yeah, people are, I think, too lazy to start selling each of their personal data items. So yeah, I agree, but we'll see. I don't see that people will start now taking too much ownership because maybe it's technically just too complex for now. And once it gets ready, maybe people will just be done with it and say, actually, maybe I don't care anymore because it's been such a long process. That's why maybe, we have to hurry.
My next question is, how do you think we should decentralize data storage to better enable Web3?
I can go first. I think for Bundlr specifically, it's really important to enable the builders who are currently Web3 native, but then also start onboarding Web2 developers as well. And that means providing tools that are easy to use, flexible, and don't present a specific bias on using a chain. So that's something that we're really focused on at Bundlr, and we're really lucky to have great partnerships with, I call it dev watering holes, like Developer DAO. And yeah, I think that's going to be a big part in creating decentralized data storage.
I love hearing about Developer DAO. What about the others?
Go ahead.
I generally think, are we talking about, I think you can distinguish this. So what would you, how would you narrow it down? So in terms of, because the scope is just massive, sorry. I personally, can't even imagine how huge this universe might or might not become. That's why, I don't know. Maybe I'm too stuck in one box to think outside the box. That could be it. That's why it's a tough
Sounds
one.
like we just need more experiments.
Yeah, definitely.
We don't have enough options today.
I agree, yeah.
LDF?
That's honestly my perspective. I think we're still so early in reimagining what decentralized data storage means, who owns the types of data, what protections are needed, and so the more choice that we can provide to end users and teams to be able to make those decisions as we learn more, the better off we will be. But I do not think we're there today.
Still working. Yes. When it comes to data storage, how do you think we should split, like what should go off-chain, what should go on-chain, what should go to different layer 2s, the broad view on this? What's your opinion?
I'm probably I'm a big advocate of layer 2s. So I think a lot can go to layer 2s, if not all, just due to scalability, but also I guess security these days. So I think we'll see more and more, for instance, KYC providers or solutions that will be fully, I hope at least fully on-chain, meaning your personal identity or everything around that will be somehow stored on-chain. And yeah, I'm not sure if people are ready for this, but this will bring down costs and efficiency when it comes to KYCing people, and all of us KYC or do KYC probably quite regularly. So that's a huge benefit. Also something like storing data, like loan data, which if you go to a bank will be like, I don't know, 200 pages just about you, about your mortgage as an example. So I think all this data can be stored online because, on-chain and online, because these days it's still offline, believe it or not, in many instances, which in my opinion is less secure than storing it in an encrypted way. So I don't know. I think people will have maybe an issue of storing health data, but I think we've seen now that people are actually fine with having their smartphone collect all that data and still be in some sort of cloud that obviously is not maybe as secure as something on-chain. So I don't know. Tough one.
Well, as someone building kind of a solution to that problem, I would say, at least for me, my default answer is that nothing should be on chain unless it needs to. Almost that is the last, as long as we have data that can be independently verifiable, encrypted against people's private keys, stored in decentralized storage, and able to interact with blockchains, we can't go back the other way, right? Once you put your healthcare data on a chain, regardless of what that is, there is no take-backsies. And so to the extent that as we get into more consequential data, that we can kind of focus on user privacy and control and then make those decisions as we need to, that's my preference.
Yeah, I would say at Bundlr, we don't have a specific bias towards what should be on-chain versus off-chain because it really depends on the individual, the project, the company that's deciding, because we require different data strategies. I'll use an example of my mother. So my mother has these family photos that she loves dearly and wants them to live on forever, even when she passes. So for her, it's actually incredibly valuable to be storing those photos permanently on Arweave and have instant accessibility, which is something that Bundlr enables. And that's her personal incentives, right? She doesn't have to maintain it afterwards. She pay once, stored forever. She doesn't have to worry about her kids forgetting about it. And again, it's really dependent on the individuals and the projects. Usually we do have trade-offs that you have to consider when you're looking at on-chain versus off-chain, which is cost, accessibility, speed, scalability, and security. What's really nice about Bundlr is that the usual negatives of access, speed, and scalability isn't necessarily a negative for on-chain anymore because we're instantly available. There's infinite scalability, and what did I forget? Oh, our upload time is really fast. So we're currently at 25 to 50 milliseconds for upload time. So yeah, I mean, it's highly dependent on what the people care about.
Gary, you mentioned KYC. Currently, KYC is pretty centralized. There are several entities who are providing this service. Do you think in the future we can decentralize this process?
Yeah. I think will be actually quite soon. There are a number of projects that work on that. One that gets me very excited is like Polygon ID, which goes into that direction, and a number of others. So yeah, I do think a lot of that will become something that will just become, first of all, more efficient, and B, arguably for someone that tends to be more anonymous, browsing the web or using dApps, etc., and tends to be more anonymously, might be actually more open to that kind of KYC, especially if you combine it, let's say, with some sort of zero-knowledge solution than a centralized Web2 provider. So that gets me very excited because I think a lot of users and people that we interact with, also our cohort, will be more open to KYC with that kind of a solution than maybe with a centralized one, and that might solve that issue of non-custodial wallets where you have no clue who's behind that, and we see more and more regulation coming into that space that puts more pressure on the fact that you don't know who the person or who the people are behind that wallet and where those funds potentially come from. So I think that there's huge improvements coming our way in the next months and years.
Currently, a lot of applications are using Node API providers like Infura, Alchemy. This is definitely not ideal. However, when should be content with the level of decentralization? Do you think everyone should run a node at home, or where should we have the perfect balance?
So we work with both, and yeah, it's not perfect, but I guess it's the best solution right now. But I'm all for competition and things to improve as we enter more sophisticated technological space. So. There are issues with both and using also the third parties, but it's still early. We're still early, so that's why I wouldn't say that this is currently the main issue that most companies face or most services face.
Yeah, we say that decentralization is a spectrum. I think there's a big opportunity with client projects like Celestia are making huge moves. We're really excited about the Solana mobile phone as well for people to be able to actually run their own nodes. So I do think it is a possibility in the future, but not quite yet.
LDF?
I agree.
Now, what do you think are the new opportunities that are enabled by Web3 and decentralized data storage and data ownership?
I'm really excited about the opportunity for kind of reusable information. I think right now we have kind of this fragmented sense of self across the internet, showing up to a new website for the first time and being asked the same questions over and over again, having your relationships kind of segmented into these different buckets of professional, personal, and so the opportunity to kind of logically centralize information around a person within Web3 is something that I'm really excited about, not only for efficiency of not filling out another 10 million forms, but also just for the personalization that can come from that from a number of different places within our lives.
Yeah, I'm really excited about leveling the playing field. So with decentralized data storage, there's a reduction in information asymmetry that lives within these very large enterprises. So with increased competition means increased innovation and people really, like they used to say in Web2, being disrupted. And yeah, I'm excited to see the disruptors be disrupted by decentralized data storage.
Yeah.
More disruptors.
Fully agree. But I think especially cloud providers will try to fight back. Maybe they already do. Yeah, that will be an interesting fight, like David versus Goliath. So,
can we have Julien right now, or is still not working? Okay. Okay, we can move forward. Do you think some of the traditional Web2 companies will embrace Web3, will try to adapt to this?
I think they'll take the parts that are convenient to them. I think we've already kind of started seeing this with Instagram rolling out NFTs. I like to ask the question, at that point, what is Web3? What are the values that we actually hold dear versus kind of the centralized approach to, I guess, LARPing as Web3. So I think especially in the beginning, we'll definitely see existing services embrace, the parts that are convenient, and then it's up to us to provide better experiences that they never could within their business models or otherwise.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, there's tons of conferences where you see Web2 companies. So they're obviously very interested. They're trying to pivot their business models. And I don't think it's a David versus Goliath. I think there's an opportunity for us to try to work together, but maybe that's me being too idealistic. But But like one thing that Bundlr is thinking about is like, again, how do we onboard the Web 2 developers over to Web 3? And that's creating tools that are going to be more familiar for them to use. So we're adding a fiat on-ramp to like as a layer on top of our network, as well as something called Preweave, which is a soaking layer with a permanent backing, which essentially allows a lot of these Web 2 players to be able to meet some of the like regulatory requirements that they have to adhere to. So, yeah, I think there's an opportunity for us to work together.
Yeah, there is the problem is all those corporates they due to compliance, regulation, etc. They tend to slow things down. But yeah, that's what we need, I guess, to get to the next stage of mass adoption of our technologies. And yeah, I know for a fact there are hundreds, if not thousands, corporates. Fortune 500 companies, etc., that are exploring more than just, hey, let's write some or do some research in it, but they're actually trying to implement based on different scaling solutions, and they're actually inquiring with many blockchains. Okay, what can you offer us for that specific use case? Data privacy, from where I'm standing, I haven't seen much going into that direction. They're more interested into finding an alternative to data storage. So speaking about cloud solutions and facilitating mass amounts of say payments, right? So something that actually the blockchain can facilitate probably even better than most technologies that we have out there. So yeah, as I said, still early days, but I think this time in 2-3 years, yeah, maybe it won't be a David versus Goliath anymore. I hope so. Yeah.
Let's shift now a bit towards Web3 protocols. Which team have you seen out there that are taking the right steps, let's say, towards data decentralization?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this earlier. Someone said this earlier, like NFT projects, any sort of like content management have obviously taken the first big step for decentralized data storage. Like Lens is a great example. LensTube is thinking about decentralized data storage. Metaplex, tools like Mirror, or I'm really passionate about the team at Manifold because they are definitely doing a lot of work for making sure that the contracts are built in the best interest of the artists. But then there's also other groups like Developer DAO, and we're incredibly grateful for them because they are really doing a lot of work when it comes to creating tutorials, which always include decentralized data storage. So have to give a shout out to them again.
I think in terms of governance, we haven't seen everything yet. I think there are a lot of things happening in the background. So voting, not just for protocol type of voting, but in general finding consensus for different kind of things. So I generally think the blockchain can be used also for political voting. We haven't seen this at scale yet. But I think we will, in the next maybe 1-2 years, we'll see an example of how something like Snapshot, maybe not Snapshot itself, but governance tools will be used, and that might be a game changer. We'll see.
And I would say from an actual storage perspective, I really appreciate the work teams like Ceramic and kind of Spruce with Kepler, Web5, some of these like actual taking on the problem of decentralized storage for other types of data, mutable data. We really need those to exist in order to even be able to build applications on top of these services. So very much looking forward to more work on the privacy perspective, but yeah, there's a lot to come there.
Sure.
So far, we evangelized a lot the decentralization of data. However, let's touch a bit on the risk of decentralizing the data. What are the risks associated with this?
I think we talked about accountability earlier, but also responsibility, right? We're very much general users of the internet today, are used to centralized services, very simple front ends, not needing to have a lot of expertise in security, even just accountability of existing on the internet and the types of consequential data that have been held by private services that we've kind of enjoyed over the past 15 or so years. So I think that there's a lot of education to do about being a responsible internet citizen online and what comes with kind of the promise of ownership in responsibility.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. I think if everyone owns the data, no one owns the data. That's like an easy, like if you've ever worked at a large enterprise before, that's like a huge problem that they'll experience. I'm also concerned about dirty data, which was like another thing. Like if there's no standardization on like how the data should be input or any sort of like composability of data, then like that's highly concerning because again, if you've ever worked with data before and your data set sucks, then have fun trying to transform it in order to get any sort of use of it. So yeah, I think there needs to be a greater discussion on like how are we formatting our data, going back to the original point of like who owns what, and yeah.
Yeah, fully agree. Just stay safe out there.
I think it's about time to take some audience questions. Who has a question for our panelists? We have a question there. If we can give a mic.
I feel like you're loud enough without a mic.
Okay.
So much of Web3, especially from, thank you. So much of Web3, especially from a DAO and organizational perspective, relies heavily on a very centralized stack. From Google Drive to Gmail to tools like Discord and Twitter. So curious for you guys, as we start to think about replacing the elements of this stack, we've already mentioned storage. What are the critical pieces that might offer an inflection point where we can, move from decentralized assets on a centralized stack to a truly decentralized ecosystem?
So to your last point, I think some of the standardization of how we're intaking data from Web 2, when we show up to Web 3 applications for the first time, it's not our first day on the internet, right? We've accrued a lot of kind of reputation, preferences, information, relationships that needs to kind of be ported into this new ecosystem so that we're not starting from zero. And so I think to the extent that we can help package up the information that we already have that we might not have had control over in the way that we may be able to in the future, using things like decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials, in addition to on-chain proofs of actions that have already happened, the more we can kind of take a jump into what's possible from now, but not starting from zero.
Ditto to that. Like Web 2 offboarding is going to be fun. Yeah. Just like with change management and whatnot, that's going to be super fun. I think about like delightful user experiences. So like if we're not making people's life incrementally better, then who cares? Like no one's going to switch over to Web 3. And the way that we're thinking about that is like enabling apps that can scale, that are performant, that are just easy to use. And then I think it's going to be easier to like convey the benefits of like why your project or your organization should move over to like Web3 tools.
Yeah. Yeah, on the topic of Discord, we had an internal discussion. So Discord is super centralized. We still use it, also for internal stuff. And it's, I guess, about composability, right? All the other options out there that are more or less decentralized are not as composable as the existing options. Coming back to UI, UX, how easy it is, essentially, not just for me, but also for our teams, maybe to use that in their day-to-day business. So I think products need to become 10x easier to use, especially dApps and decentralized services. And then I think we'll have continuous mass adoption of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If we won't use them ourselves, why should anyone else?
Exactly.
I think we have another gentleman waiting to ask a
Yes.
question.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. Two questions. So first, a negative and a positive maybe. First, the negative. You talked all about the data, but I'm just curious, what do you think when ZK nets roll out? I mean, so many are toying with that right now. A lot of the data will disappear, right? So what do you guys think about that? And the other thing is maybe the more positive one. We saw with SudoSwap that basically they like provide a way to cheat like creators out of their like NFT royalties from the other NFT marketplaces. So when do you think we will see like a real implementation, so like hard-coded, like for NFTs or like for other creators, so you really have a, you know, like that the royalties can get to these guys, doesn't matter where the trade is happening?
Do you mind repeating the first question? Was it a question or a statement?
No, it's
Okay.
a question. So you guys are all about data, and but what with blockchain technology that tries to hide a lot of the data or make it like more private? What are you going to do then? Or is it I mean, how do you look at that? You know, like ZK EVMs or like ZK nets, like different rollups, they say we make it like more private, the data, right? So people cannot even read it anymore. So how do you see that? Or is
So I think the question is like on ZK rollups, you're saying that people are going to privatize their data versus like us needing to have access to data. I guess I'm not. Is anyone else understanding the question?
Yeah, I mean, the data is just hidden, right? I mean, a lot of that will be just, you cannot, like, you know, it's right, it's true, but you cannot really see inside. So what are you guys going to do about that?
Oh, do you want to talk about verifying data?
Yeah, I guess in terms of being able to read the data versus being able to prove that it's true, is that kind of the direction that you're talking about? I mean, I think we need to build more complex systems to be able to have individuals grant access to different types of availability of that data. So if it benefits me as a user to share more about the data than you could compute via ZK proof on your own, then I would be incentivized to be able to share that information with you instead of simply you on your own in the side kind of trying to figure out information about me.
The other alternative that you could do, you could store the proof permanently on something like Arweave via Bundlr, but then the actual data could live on a ZK sync where it's private. So say you were requested to demonstrate proof, that could be on chain, but it's not actually showing the full data set. So that's another alternative to think about.
Make it more compelling for me to want to share with you.
Do we have time for another question, or it's lunchtime?
How about the SudoSwap and the NFT standard?
Okay, I guess we can take one more question.
Sure, I think.
Because you've been talking a lot about data storage, how we compose it. What does diversity mean? Like data types. You said data is only relevant in its context. And we've been talking about the type of data that naturally sits on chain, oftentimes quantitative, transactional data. What other data is relevant and would add to the diversity in terms of when we think more analytics, contextualizing data, presenting it to the end user? What are things that are missing, could be added? Where's that going?
Well, the simple answer is all of it. But I think this is why the burden of building new applications that have, I guess, these moments that you're experiencing, actions that you're taking, right? We're still just existing online and collecting information about the types of, whether it's a relationship that's formed or, so it's really up to the contextual experiences that we are kind of passing through on the internet to be able to determine what is valuable, not only in its current form to have yourself, but what that unlocks for you in the future. So I think that's, yeah, the burden is on the applications to figure out what those interactions they're actually trying to facilitate are, instead of retroactively trying to analyze what happened here.
I don't know if anyone's read the terms and conditions with Instagram, but it's interesting to see how they actually look at data and who owns it. The fact of the matter is we actually own a lot of our data. We just sign away the rights to our data, which kind of goes back to my original point of like control and access. So with Instagram, there's input data, metadata, observed data, and then derived data. So that's when Instagram takes your information and then overprocesses it and then creates insights on like what we should buy essentially. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to like look at what Web2 had done and like converge it into what would be the best suited version for Web3 that really serves our users because that's the whole reason why we're here is that like we're trying to move applications back towards the user's best interests, and we have really great use cases that we could learn from on how we can do it better this time. So that's what I think about.
Yeah. I think this discussion is ongoing, and the better the products will become, the stronger the argument will be to find a new way to process exactly that. So very excited about that.
Well, that was an excellent panel. So, guest speakers, thank you very much. Bianca, thank you for moderating. Very enlightening, to say the very least.